You probably remember downloading Pixelgun 3D on your tablet that barely had enough storage to run properly. The game icon looked harmless, almost welcoming in a way, that made it feel safe to click, obviously inspired by the inviting feeling Minecraft created. You spawned on that eerily quiet farm for the first time, with the nearly pitch black sky above you, and just the moon providing light, the empty and seemingly endless fields stretching out in every direction. The zombies moved slowly, but the music felt off, in a way you couldn't explain back then, and might not even be able to now. It wasn't exactly intense, or even dramatic, it was just hollow. You and I most likely didn't consciously notice it at the time, since we were so young. But the soundtrack alone was already hinting from the first minute that something was wrong. Most videos about the campaign just talk about the guns, bosses, or specific level features. But today we're gonna cover what everyone else fails to, like the campaign's general atmosphere, its level design, and the music theory that subconsciously shaped the entire emotional experience. And by the time we reach World 4, you might start realizing that the campaign was never aiming for a satisfying ending in the first place. Our story starts in Pixelated World, the iconic campaign setting for Pixelgun 3D, the foundation to everything that comes later. You abruptly wake up on a farm, and there's no dialogue, no introduction easing us into the world, just an abrupt start and a horde of zombies that are slowly approaching you from across the farm. Upon leaving the initial spawn, you realize just how open the map is, which is a small detail that'll be important later, a detail that sets up for the ending of World 3. There's minimal natural cover, sizable stretches of empty terrain, the bright stadium-like lighting overhead makes you feel like you are being watched. Most people will just write this off as nothing more than me overthinking it, which might be partially true, but it isn't entirely. The openness of the map creates a sense of vulnerability, resulting in you having to check your back at all times. The map design isn't even the most manipulative element. The subtle aspect of exposure fills in the place of tension to compensate for the lack of aggressive monsters. Each wave is slow. It almost feels kind of awkward, which somehow only makes the level feel even more eerie. The soundtrack and sound design deserves more credit than people give it. As someone who loves music and has spent countless hours producing my own, I can't help but notice just how much of the soundtrack relies on repetitive, ambient loops and minor keys. For example, the soundtrack for the farm level. The track sits at 60 BPM, which is the average human resting heart rate, and it's not a coincidence. Listen to the tempo at 60 BPM. So why would they sync the track's BPM to your resting pulse? Well, the hi-hats are at 4 times the speed of the BPM. The soundtrack puts you at a calm state since it is on tempo with your resting heart rate, but also tense since the hi-hats are playing at 4 times the speed. You'll see this technique again in World 2, in a different way. Here's another aspect nobody talks about. The sound selection on this track stood out to me. The game version of this song includes a lot of added ambient sound effects, like the toilet flush at 8 seconds. As well as these laughing sounds that ring out, which obviously doesn't make sense in terms of the story, which is where the storyline starts to break some of its own logic, raising the question of who could have made that noise. The general vibe this specific track conveys kind of sets the overall theme for the rest of World 1, leaning much more towards the feeling of uncertainty as we're still getting introduced to the story. Eventually we reach the hospital to look for any clues or potential survivors of the apocalypse. As our character realizes it was pointless, he hears a motor start in the distance. He finally feels like this is his chance to escape. He runs towards the exit of the hospital, being chased by the swarm of zombies. He realizes that this was his only chance at getting out, as the helicopter goes over the broken bridge. This moment seems small, but it changes the overall tone for the entire campaign. Remember how I mentioned that the open map design of the farm would be important? The maps start to introduce more confined areas, making it more likely for you to get cornered by monsters if you don't kill them fast enough, as well as the overall lighting becoming more dramatic, like the flickering lights in the hospital, and the red tinted warm lighting at the school, which we'll get into in a second. Everything from the lights to shadows feels so much heavier than before. The soundtrack for the rest of the maps still make you feel uneasy, utilizing mostly the same techniques we covered in the farm track. The overall creepiness of World 1 doesn't come from hyper-realistic graphics, because I mean, this is far from that, but it's a consequence of negative space and sound design unique to each level. As our character works his way through the world, he finds the crash site of the helicopter that abandoned him, only to realize that the helicopter is beyond repair, and the pilot that was the only sign of life is now dead. He decides to revisit a childhood park of his, hoping to find some safety, but that was far from the case. The forest level is clear proof that atmosphere matters more than anything. As we look back at it now, it's obviously not as scary. The fact that so many of us remember this level goes to show how well the characteristics of the forest design work. The fog paired with little to no lighting, completely destroying your line of sight. This style of design takes a complete 180, as you'll see in the next world. It's fair to say that the forest level is up there with some of the most iconic campaign levels of all time. World 1 comes to an end with the school level, which utilizes overwhelmingly red tinted lighting across the map. I could talk about this level forever. From the room with papers frozen in midair, the help us written in blood on the chalkboard, to the room filled with hanging corpses of what we can only assume were the students. But one thing I've noticed that remained constant throughout the levels that are widely remembered for how they scared us is all of these locations are typically associated with safety, like the farm that was once his home, the forest, which was the childhood park of our character, and now the school. However, this pattern is rapidly broken, as you'll see in World 2. After you fight off the monsters, which are zombified nurses, teachers, and students, you find a portal in the school's courtyard, which makes you question just how much deeper the story goes, foreshadowing what's to come in the next 3 worlds. Our main character is thrown violently out of the portal. Immediately, the familiar hometown feeling disappears. There's no farm, and no more childhood parks. Apart from that, the color palette dramatically changes. There's an obvious warmer tone to the colors, paired with an almost desolate feeling, making it look more like an imaginary land compared to World 1. Our character also notices the drastic environmental shift, since he's greeted by a literal walking chicken, who seems to be slowly approaching a girl as she screams for help. Like at the beginning, our man, being the warrior he is, kills the chicken, saving the girl. Concepts like the chicken man that are odd and out of place will become a regular occurrence, as you'll see in World 3. Now that he's finally made contact with another survivor after all of this time, he asks the girl what's exactly going on, because up until now he's had nothing but a few clues as to what's happening. She tells the story of how she stumbled upon the portal that we just fell through, where she then jumped into it and smacked a sleeping dragon on the head with the shovel, basically telling us that as a result of her waking up the dragon, he sent monsters through the portal, which more or less caused the entire zombie apocalypse. With this new environment, the general map design introduces verticality. The soundtrack reflects the evolution from creepy to an adventurous theme. But there's the part that most people overlooked. The average soundtrack tempo increases noticeably. For example, the first track from Utopia Village has a BPM of 95. Or the track from Sky Islands, where the tempo sits at 90 BPM. The drums across all of the tracks from this world become much more pronounced. World 2 is my favorite world from the campaign, just because of how warm and inviting it all feels. The combination of a powerful soundtrack combined with heavily influenced textures from the earlier versions of Minecraft really captures that early 2010s feel. As we near the end of World 2, our final level is the parallel world, which looks familiar. After you defeat the enemies of this level, our character has a talk with the dragon. This is where we would naturally be met with the resolution to the problem. After everything we went through in this world to reach who we thought would be the root of the problem, logically this should have been the end of our story. However, the dragon isn't the root of the problem. He doesn't even threaten us, offering to assist us. This section ends on a pretty ominous note, with the dragon saying, "I'll chase the monsters from your world, but it's not your biggest problem." That's where our story shifts. Now we reached Crossworlds, which is where the overall cohesion falls apart. We'll see the story play into the aspect of unsettling environments with strange creatures. The overall pacing of combat increases dramatically. Now the enemies have ranged attacks, and we have wizards with unpredictable movement. Picking up where the story ended in World 2, our characters finally arrive at the swamp, where our short-lived friendship with the dragon comes to an end, since supposedly there's a barrier that blocks creatures like him from crossing it. After completing the swamp and castle levels, our characters confront the wizard, who's the overseer for this area, and who our characters assumed would have the answers. But he also doesn't give us an answer. Instead, he mentions the great creator, claiming only he has the answers to our character's question. But instead of bringing us directly to him, we have to go through two levels, being the space station and Megalopolis. Up until now, the soundtrack has remained pretty consistent in terms of style, although here it shifts more aggressively. The acoustic instruments were completely scrapped for this section, perfectly on brand for the time period that it was released. They used a lot of electronic music, like for the space station level. Or the Megalopolis track, which I'd be lying if I said they weren't both bangers. The sound selection for World 3 is the most crucial element for the overall theme, unlike the previous two worlds where the BPM was the most obvious aspect. Aside from dubstep being a time-relevant choice, it was a good choice for this level, because the wobbly bass adds an unstable feeling. After defeating the aliens at the space station, then the military mechs in the city, after all of this time, we can finally meet the great creator and actually get to the bottom of why World 1 is in ruins. The creator finally reveals the reason everything has been consumed by blocks, and it's not a magical being or an ancient curse. The real explanation to this entire mess is not what you or even I expected. It's a bug. This forces us to reconsider how we interpret every level before this. Now that we know the root of the problem, the creator has tasked our character with venturing into the code of the game to hopefully destroy the bug that's causing everything inside and outside of the game to be consumed. The level design here is pretty different from the pattern we've seen. Instead of tight spaces, we revert back to that exposed layout we saw in World 1. After you defeat the final boss, the bug leaves us with a final message as he zaps the main character, laughing. Did you know when you kill the bug, you become the bug? That line isn't too impactful, but it's actually pretty important. Instead of the shock causing our character to just die as he thinks, he gets sent into the internet, which is where this world concludes. Virtual Worlds is the latest addition to the campaign story. I'll avoid being too critical for the sake of avoiding another rant video, but I felt like it was important to mention, because just from one look at the roadmap for this world, the art style doesn't exactly feel like it belongs. Now in World 4, we're dropped onto a spaceship that's under attack by droids, where we have to defend the generators from them. At the end of this level, we're told by the captain that there's now an entity named Cubic that has trapped who we assume are the survivors in this dimension, preventing them from leaving. The captain creates a plan for us to save everyone from this evil entity. As we get through World 4, the level creatively named Jump Box brings something completely new to the campaign, which is a parkour section. I'm not gonna lie, it was annoying. Literally every level up until this point has been significantly more difficult than the previous worlds. Citadel and Jump Box took me so long to complete on easy difficulty. The final level, Cubic, was hard, but not as hard as Citadel for some reason. I will say this level is almost a direct copy of Into the Code. Even if the concept or idea was similar, they could have at least tried to make it more unique. As we get filled in on the lore after the final level, we have another plot twist. But this is a very lazy plot twist. Our main character basically comes to the realization that he only completed a game, and he's still stuck in the simulation as well as everyone else, making the conclusion feel a bit circular, ending on the note that he now needs to figure out how to escape for real. The soundtrack across the entire world is just generic electronic music. I can't think of anything to complement this section on, apart from the slight attempt at something new with the parkour section. But it's clearly inspired by the parkour minigame, with reused assets from the old knockoff Five Nights at Freddy's arena map. This world felt really dragged out. It didn't take long in a challenging way. It just felt poorly made. For example, the floating platforms you had to jump on in the parkour level, since they'd literally just throw you off. Even if you managed to time it properly, it didn't even matter. This story feels incomplete, even after following the actual story provided to us. It feels directionless after World 3, which might be intentional, and Cubic Games is just playing chess while we're over here playing checkers. However, it just feels like an endless cycle of, oh, it's a simulation, just making it up as they go, trying to drag it out as long as possible. The first two worlds had clear correlation, even while introducing odd creatures or locations that almost felt out of place. The soundtrack of the first three worlds is an example of it being more than just background noise. There was clear thought put into it, since the overall feeling of the player was influenced by the different range of BPMs, sound selection, and style. The overall level design of the first three worlds also had a unique charm that was basically non-existent in World 4. These small details didn't even add realism to the map necessarily, they contributed to the overall personality. As far as my theory for what's to come in this world to hopefully conclude the storyline is hard to say. So where does the story actually go from here? World 5 has remained as coming soon since the release of World 4, all the way back in 2019, 7 years ago. World 1 and 2 were released in 2013. As I've said countless times in my other videos, after 2013, the Pixelgun team put almost all of their resources towards the multiplayer aspect of the game. If we ever do get a World 5, I would hope it ends on us finally escaping this simulation, returning home with everything back to normal. This would be a good time for us to finally get to know more about the characters, at least the main character Newbie, like some basic information about his life. I feel like it would be a good sound conclusion for the Pixelgun campaign, since after all we were pretty much just thrown into the story. Think back to the first farm level, the deafening silence. The unresolved music, with ambience looping quietly in the background. You felt something was off, and you can finally explain why. The original campaign of Pixelgun 3D wasn't memorable and loved just because of nostalgia. It was memorable because of the level design and soundtrack that were building tension from the start. Almost nobody talks about that. And as children, we didn't exactly have the vocabulary or even understanding to explain it. Regardless, we still felt it. And that's exactly why it stayed with you.